And trade tensions between the United States and China may be easing as the White House signals progress in ongoing negotiations.
$600 billion. That's how much G7 countries pledged to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, a project that looks to recreate the ancient Silk Road. Beijing says it will spend more than $1 trillion on ports, roads, bridges, and rails.
It was called the Build Back Better World, an ambitious, Western-led counterstrike meant to halt China's economic conquest across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Roads, ports, railways, digital corridors. The idea was to outspend, outconnect, and outshine Beijing's global influence. A $40 trillion promise to the developing world. But fast forward to today, and something doesn't add up. No megaports, no high-speed railways, no viral ribbon-cutting ceremonies like Beijing's. In fact, outside a few press releases and dusty pledges, there's barely a trace of America's grand counter-project. So, what really happened? Was the Build Back Better World a real geopolitical weapon? Or just a PR stunt for headlines? But before understanding why B3W faded, let's first revisit what it was and the bold ambitions behind its launch. In June 2021, the G7 countries announced Build Back Better World B3W, a bold idea to rival China's Belt and Road. It promised to help low- and middle-income nations close a staggering $40 trillion infrastructure gap by 2035. The goal? Attract private investment to global projects that uphold values-driven principles, transparency, good labor standards, social safeguards, and environmental protections rooted in the Blue Dot Network model. B3W zeroed in on 4 key areas: climate and clean energy, supporting sustainable power grids, health and health security, improving systems to handle pandemics, digital tech, expanding secure modern communications, gender equity and equality, ensuring projects support women's empowerment. It was pitched as a values-driven, high-standard alternative to BRI, promising not just infrastructure, but responsible global growth. Though it didn't pin down specific countries or projects, it leaned on existing multilateral tools like the U.S. Development Finance Corporation and USAID to mobilize private capital. But despite its sweeping vision, B3W never moved beyond general goals. There was no public roadmap, no list of projects, no finance pipeline beyond a few consulting exercises. In short, it was a powerful idea, but still just that. By mid-2022, B3W underwent a reset, scaled back, renamed, and repackaged to turn vision into action. Enter PGII. In June 2022, at Germany's G7 summit, B3W was transformed into the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII. No longer a $40 trillion ambition, PGII aimed to mobilize $600 billion by 2027, a far smaller but more focused goal. Contributions were roughly divided. U.S. approximately $200 billion via public funding, federal grants, and private sector leverage. EU approximately 300 billion euros, approximately $315 billion, through global gateway initiatives. Other G7, the remaining approximately 85 billion PGII, kept the original 4 pillars: climate, health, digital connectivity, and gender equity, but added energy security explicitly, emphasizing transparent and sustainable investment. It also officially anchored itself in Blue Dot Trust standards for governance, environment, and anti-corruption. Following the launch, G7 leaders held investor forums and coordinated with the World Bank and major finance players, BlackRock, GIP-KKR to turn broad goals into project pipelines. The focus shifted to developing real-world examples. The Lobito Rail Corridor in Africa, e-bus programs in India, and renewable energy in Angola and Zambia, all designed to demonstrate PGII in action. However, even with this relaunch, details remained sparse. Funds were committed, but large-scale projects were slow to get rolling, fraught with complex coordination and lingering political delays. Since the launch of PGII in June 2022, only a handful of meaningful projects have reached fruition. One of the most notable is a massive solar energy initiative in Angola, led by the U.S. Export-Import Bank, PGII. In June 2023, XIM approved over $900 million in loans to support 2 photovoltaic plants, generating around 500 megawatts, supplying clean energy to communities and enabling local job creation, with about 1,600 jobs expected. Independently, Sun Africa wrapped up a 370-megawatt project, reaching more than 1 million people and diverting nearly 1 million tons of CO2 emissions annually. Beyond energy, progress has been limited. In Senegal, a $2.9 million solar pumping system was set up in June 2024 to supply irrigation across 330 hectares, benefiting 330 farmers, supporting climate-smart agriculture and women's economic resilience. Although valuable locally, this scale is tiny compared to China's large BRI projects. Other efforts have remained mostly talk. Listening tours in Africa and Latin America aimed at building networks, but these lacked follow-through or major infrastructure outcomes. Meanwhile, aside from a few Exim-backed loans and small-scale investments, there has been no launch of major highways, ports, railways, or broadband networks through PGII. In numbers, PGII's tangible output includes approximately 500 megawatts of solar in Angola, approximately 370 megawatts from Sun Africa's Project 1 pilot solar irrigation in Senegal. A few preparatory forums and planning exercises, compared with BRI, which has completed multiple multi-billion-dollar roads, railways, ports, and power grids globally. PGII's achievements remain modest. With only small projects yet to show, what's behind PGII's sluggish pace? Let's examine the biggest challenges that have slowed its momentum. PGII's slow rollout isn't random. It stems from 4 critical challenges. 1. Financing gap. PGII aimed to leverage $600 billion by 2027, including $200 billion from the U.S. But most of that was meant to come from private investors. Private capital has stayed away, hampered by the long timeline and low returns of emerging market infrastructure. The Global Times noted that much of the pledged U.S. funding likely won't materialize, and PGII risks becoming another empty promise like B3W. 2. Domestic distractions. At home, U.S. leaders were busy finalizing a $1 trillion domestic infrastructure bill, cut from an even larger proposal. Congress showed little appetite for funding overseas projects when domestic roads, bridges, and broadband remain undersupplied. 3rd, China's mockery and momentum. Beijing wasted no time calling PGII a vague political stunt designed to counter BRI. The Global Times dismissed it as a shouted slogan and predicted failure without sincere commitment. Meanwhile, China continued building real infrastructure, roads, ports, and rail lines, and locking in long-term trade deals across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The core struggles of the PG2 project lie in a gap between promises and actual funding. While the U.S. and its allies pledged billions, much of the money was expected to come from private investors, many of whom never committed. This left a massive difference between what was promised and what was truly mobilized. At the same time, the U.S. government was heavily focused on its domestic infrastructure challenges. With attention and resources directed inward, the ambition to build globally often took a back seat. PGII also suffered from a lack of clear planning, slow execution, and very little follow-through. When America's counteroffer to BRI fails to impress, it leaves the door wide open for China to expand its influence. With no serious Western alternative, China's BRI becomes the default option for many countries looking to improve their infrastructure and trade networks. That includes roads, ports, energy grids, and digital highways. Countries that were once on the fence may now lean toward Beijing simply because the BRI shows up with real money, clear plans, and fast action, while PGII remains vague and slow. The failure of PG2 also sends a message. It shows that the West, especially the US, might not be ready or willing to match China's speed, scale, and financial commitment. And that matters, not just for global development, but for global politics. As more countries join BRI and build closer ties with China, this isn't just about roads and bridges. It's about who gets to set the rules in the world economy and who earns long-term trust from developing nations. To make things worse, many of the countries looking for support prefer what PGII claimed to offer: clean financing, climate-friendly plans, no debt traps, and respect for local needs. But if the US can't deliver those things quickly and clearly, then even countries that share democratic values might choose China out of sheer necessity. In the end, the B3W/PG2 story is a tale of missed potential. It began with a powerful vision, a $40 trillion effort to reshape the global economy and stand toe-to-toe with China's BRI. But over time, the project shrank in scale, lost political momentum, and became more of a slogan than a strategy. It still exists on paper, and some progress has been made, but nowhere near enough to fulfill its original mission. If the US truly wants to counter China's growing global influence, it must go beyond good intentions. That means putting real money on the table, offering detailed plans, and creating a clear path forward that both investors and developing countries can trust. It also requires political unity at home, because no global project can succeed if leaders are distracted by domestic debates. The world is watching.